Hey guys, thanks for clicking through onto the video and welcome to the first episode of the rebuild of my RPG from scratch Unity tutorial series. Of course, this one's not exactly from scratch. We are going to be using a couple of template systems, put them together to show you the kind of power and how easy it is to prototype your first RPG adventure game. So we'll get straight into it. So the first thing that we do is we start off with an idea in our heads of what we want to do. We want to make an RPG. That's the first thing we think of. Now, I always find it best that you start off with an actual game design document. So you put some of your thoughts down on paper, you flesh out a little bit more about what you want to do so that you do have a clear vision in your head when you set out. Of course, you can always play around with any kind of assets that you've got, just fiddling around with systems, and then you might come up with something. Again, I went through in another video in the old series talking with the difference about an idea for a game or an idea for a game mechanic or a tech demo, and trying to figure out the difference between those two things and figuring out exactly what you want to build. We're just going to go straight ahead and believe that we're going to build a video game demo. So the first thing we take a look at is the game design document. Now, if this looks familiar to you, I have actually been doing a Udemy course recently on building an RPG using basically from scratch, so writing your own scripts and things like that. And there was a bit of game design theory in that I've definitely drawn from for this series. So that's certainly where I got most of the template from for this document. Anyway, so at the top here, we're going to have a look. We've got the name of the project, which is now just Encardia. That's just the default name for my fantasy realm for the lore that I've come up with. And it's just brief game design document. Then here you've just got a little sub line here of basically just like a one-line spiel about what your game is about. So mine's a single-player action RPG set in the realm of Encardia. Then you can always throw up images here that's sort of inspiration images or something that you would like your game to look like. Obviously, because I've had a little bit of work done previously on with the previous series, I've got an image of what I actually want it to look like using the assets that I do have. So I've thrown that up there. We'll move down here. We can define the genre of it. Obviously, we're making an action RPG, and it's going to be using a third-person shooter controller. Now, the controls themselves, so this is where you can work out what you're sort of aiming for, specifically for the platform. So I'm aiming for a PC platform, so I want to be able to use mouse and keyboard, but with the third-person control or player controller, you can actually use a gamepad controller for that. It is built in with Invector's third-person shooter, but it's also just quite handy because in most third-person cases, a controller is actually quite useful. So we're going to be building with both of those control schemes in mind. And again, the Invector controller does actually cater for both of those. So yeah, we'll come across that when we actually go through some more of the design. Then you want to talk about the thematic setting. So you want to have a look. Are you building a sci-fi fantasy game? Are you building a medieval fantasy or a high fantasy medieval game? Are you building a Western or a modern day adventure? So you can pretty much set it here, just so you've got in your mind the ability to conjure up, you know, the visuals or like the aesthetic for the theme. Moving into the next, straight away, moving into the next part, which is the atmospheric. So what does your game actually feel like when you're playing it? Are you trying to make a funny game? Are you trying to make a real sort of dark, serious game or a very grim style? For my one here, we're actually going to go with colourful visuals because we're going to be using the Cinti assets, which are all quite bright and, you know, low detail, nice low poly stylized assets. So we're going to keep it up with the colourful visuals, and there's also going to be a light-hearted adventure. I'm trying to make this more accessible, so I'm not going to make a dark, grim adventure where I can't have kids watch the series. So yeah, so for my game here, it's going to be a light-hearted adventure. Feel free to go along with whatever game you want to design. Now, the next part is actually one of the important parts. I originally started redoing this series in Unity 2018.2, but there was some compatibility issues with the RPG add-on, and it is being updated and addressed at the moment, but I can say that it is actually supported for 2017.4, and that's the LTS version, so it's the lifetime service. The reason why I'm going back to 2017 is just so that I know that it's ready to go and it's built, it's stable, and you know everything's there, all the support is there. I would like to go to 2018.2 because some of the tools that I'd like to use when I make my game for some of the world building stuff, so like your Vegetation Studio or your terrain editors and that, a lot of the time they're going to be bringing out updates, and those updates will require some of the processes that are in the 2018 onwards series. So you really have to think about the kind of compatibility with some of the tools that you're using. If you are building it by yourself, it's a lot easier to manage. If you do have a team, they might be working in a different version of Unity, and when they try and bring the assets in, you might get a couple of compiling errors through that way. So using Unity version control is probably one of the best ways that you can really sort of solidify what you're doing. Because I'm only making a short-term project, I'm happy with sticking with 2017.4. Hopefully in the near future the update for the RPG add-on will come out, and that will fix some of those issues that we've got there, or some of the concerns that we'd have with going to 2018.2. I don't believe I'm going to be updating any of the well, I'm certainly going to be updating Unity through this, and I don't believe I'll be updating any of the controller unless there's a massive bug that we face, which we'll discover during as our project goes along. So speaking of that, I'll jump into the assets used. I'm also highlighting the version numbers for the assets so we know exactly which ones we're using. So it's the TPS controller, so that's the third-person shooter controller. You can use the melee controller, or melee, whatever you want to, however you want to pronounce it. I'm sure one of them's correct. The reason I'm using the shooter is because I want to actually add in spells, because I believe that if it's a fantasy action RPG, you want to have a spell system in there. There is a spells add-on that you can get for the melee version, but I'm not fully over it. I don't know super amount about it. It also changes the control scheme a bit, and I think that would be a lot more hassle. So I'm really just focusing on these basic, the most base amount of assets I can use to create the game that I want. And for that reason, I'm going to use the shooter controller, because we can actually change some of the shooter mechanics into a spell mechanic and have it run naturally within the third-person controller, rather than using an add-on to sort of shoehorn a system over the top. We're going to, so that's sorry, the controller version is 1.2.2. That's the latest one as of the currency of this video. We're also going to be using the Invector AI beta 0.1. So that's the new artificial intelligence beta that's just come out, and that's a template system there for creating the NPCs. It's greatly optimized over the top of the original third-person controller's built-in AI, and it is actually native to Invector. So you'll see as we go along that it is very much a great improvement over the built-in AI system. We're also going to be using the Evil A RPG add-on. That is one of the main add-ons that well, basically the only add-on that we're going to be using for this system. This demo. And yeah, you'll see that it is actually quite strong. It integrates well with Invector, and it gives you all the functionality that you need to put in quests and a quest system, and experience points and all that sort of player stats that you'll need, which we'll discuss in the next section of the design. So that's the version number is 1.2.1_01. That's the current latest build as of currency of this film. So they're the three main systems that we're going to need and that you will need in your project in order to get to use this use what you'd learn from this video series. Some of the extra feature systems that I want to throw in there, these are actually just things that I want to put in myself. You don't necessarily need them in your project, but I'm going to take you through how to set them up, because I believe that they are the kind of functional elements that I would like to have in an RPG. We can pretty much build without them. However, I really like some of the functionality. So the first one is the Simple Physics Toolkit, which is magnet, water, wind, VR ready. Actually, you know what? I'm just going to switch across to here. So this is the AI template. This actually just hit the Invector store now. It's $45 because it's obviously quite hefty over the top of the other templates that you may already own. But again, it is adding a phenomenal amount of AI architecture and the ability to create some really fantastic AI. So it is itself a completely standalone AI system, and it can be used with other projects that aren't actually Invector third-person controller based. So you can use this in any other system, and it will add all the functionality that you need to create some really interesting AI behaviors. So we're also going to be using the Simple Physics Toolkit. which is the Magnet Water Wind VR Ready. This one here I actually had a while ago, so it says here supported Unity 5.3.4 or higher. I haven't yet come across any issues with importing it into 2017 and above. However, I haven't fully used it in those in that environment yet, so there may be some issues that we'll come across, and we'll deal with it then. So again, you don't need this for your system. I'm just putting it in here because I've got an idea for a spell that I had in an old shooter build that I did that was really cool, and I wanted to throw that in. So I would say don't grab it just yet. Wait until I actually do the video where I integrate this into the package and I come up with a spell, so that way if we know if there's going to be any incompatibility issues, you don't waste your $5. I mean, it just doesn't cost you that much, but we'll wait until then anyway. The other one that we're going to be using, which I believe works at 2017.2.3 or higher, so that's fine. That's the HUD navigation system. This is by Six Score Games. He was actually one of the community members on the Invector forums, and originally had built it with an integration or an add-on for Invector. Excuse me, third-person controller that did this, but this is actually his pro kit, which adds a lot of more features. So you've got the radar, you've got a compass bar, quest indicators, a mini-map with the indicators on them as well, custom editors to make it easier to set up some of the features. Yeah, of course you've got your Skyrim style compass, or RPG style as it's written here. It's clearly Skyrim. And it's all documented. So this is actually a really good asset. Yeah, it's $25. Again, it's up to you whether you want it. I'll show you how to implement it into the project. You might have your own solutions to that. It is not necessarily vital to the main project, but it is something that I want to throw in myself. So let's just move on from that now before we waste too much time. So the other setup I'll be using is the Cinti Polygon post-processing effects, excuse me, and the Unity post-processing stack. This is just to add a little bit more glamour to the visual effect. Won't be putting that in until mainly towards the end, so we can just sort of assess its impact on the on how the game runs, or the performance, should I say. Doesn't really matter so much when we're in the editor, when we're playing around with things, but once we start trying to push out a build there, we want to put on that to pretty it up. You also can list down the platforms that you want to distribute to. I'm just going for a basic PC distributable. You can obviously put down here, maybe you want to aim for your game to be released on Steam. Maybe you want it to actually be mobile as well, so a mobile platform. That is actually available on the controller. It does add in a few other sort of concerns and issues about the performance again, and how you compress your textures, all sorts of things like that. So I'm just going to avoid that for now because I'm not really interested in porting it to the mobile. I want some of the functionality that is just too hard to sort of replicate control-wise onto a mobile phone. So I'd rather keep it with mouse and keyboard and controller and aim it for a PC platform so I can get a bit more grunt behind it as for performance. And then the next part here, I've just got the game summary. So this is actually just going to be just a quick little write-up about, start to finish, what you want your game to be. Now, because this one here, I'm actually only really aiming for a game demo just to showcase what's actually going on with the controller and how to put on the add-on. I'm not making a full-fledged game out of this. I'm really just aiming for a demo to show the functionality of the controller and the add-on. So what I've got here in my game summary, it's a take on a predefined character role in the demonstration of the capabilities of Invector controller and Quest add-on, as I've sort of said before. So we're not going to have a character select or a character creator system. We are just going to have one predefined character that you play through. It will have a set amount of set statistics, and all that will be set and as you progress as you go along. So continuing on, so it's set against the background lore of the fantasy realm of Encardia. It's featuring action-based combat mechanics with weapons and spells, an interactive game environment. Players will complete a series of quests to progress through a level. So what I'm saying there is it's basically I'm going to show you how to set up the combat mechanics with different weapons and with the spells as well, and an interactive game environment. So basically things like interacting with objects in the world, so like doors, switches, characters, things like that. And then, of course, completing a series of quests to show off the quest system, and getting from basically the start of the level through to the end of the level to complete the demonstration or the demo. So that's just my base, document there. The whole point of this is that I can basically get that idea out of my head, put it onto paper, and then that's it. I've set it up. You can always come back and you can alter little bits and pieces as you're going along. You might think, oh, this isn't really going to work. Maybe I want to focus on something else. Oh, hey, I've got an even better idea that I can throw into this or over the top. You can just come back and you can edit it as you see fit. But for now, it just gets it out of my head and onto paper. So I've got something to work from, and I'm not constantly struggling trying to remember what it was that I thought of a while ago. It also, with this game summary, it helps me limit the scope of what I want to do, because I do want to just keep it as a demo so that I can actually finish it and get something playable out there, but also still showcase what the systems can do. Alright, so we'll push on from there again. So the next thing I'm going to do is another thing that I've pulled from what I've learned on the Udemy course. Another tool is called MindMeister. It's just a mind mapping system that you can sign up to online through the MindMeister website, and it just allows you to build these mind maps that you've got, as you can see on the screen now, and that allows you to sort of start popping out some of the thoughts and expanding on that game design that we've got. So what I've got here is build an RPG with Invector TPC. So that's what we're starting with. Now we use that and we think about what sort of elements do we need to throw on that. What will we define as an RPG game, and what elements do we need? So we start here with the basic one that we've got, player controller. So we're obviously going to have to think about the player controller. So that's basically how the player interacts with the environment, what it looks like, how it's actually controlled, so what kind of input features and functionality you have, things like that. The next thing we're going to need, obviously because it's an RPG, we're going to need a quest system. So this is going to look at how quests are set up, what kind of quests we'd have, and bits and pieces like that. Of course, we're going to need dialogue. Now that's an important one because neither the Invector, the RPG add-on doesn't yet have a fully fleshed dialogue system. It's basically just got a basic interface for quests and logging, which you'd see more akin to an MMO, but there are little ways that we can get around building our own dialogue system, and I'll show you how we're going to implement that when we get into the game. The next thing we're going to think about as well, we've already got a player, so we're actually going to need enemy AI. Now we're going to be using the beta AI template for that, so we can cover a fair few things of that, but obviously we're going to need enemy AI as part of it. As I said before, we're going to have interactive world objects, so that's going to be things like doors and so forth, because we need to be able to interact with the environment in order to push through quests, so puzzle quests, things like that. Then also we're going to need an inventory. Now that's obviously built into the third-person controller, and that'll handle all of our equipment, things like that. We're going to need a system to handle stats, because obviously it's an RPG. We want to have some progression, and we want to be able to also control all sorts of things that our character can do. So the actions in the game, they're all going to need to have equations behind them. And then of course we're going to have spells. So different from equipment and set like that, because it'll actually obviously have its own little mechanics where it affects things that are different to what the game already handles. And then of course coming up here, I've actually kept this quite far away because this is something that comes down a lot later, but actually it has some elements that we'll do first up, and I'll actually have in this video as well. But let's have a look at a little bit more detail of each of these. We'll start again with a player controller, because that's one of the main ones. Obviously our base template system is a player controller, so we need to look at how that's going to work and how we're going to utilize that. So we're going to look at here, as I mentioned in a little quick rundown, it's going to be about the controls. So we're going to have to worry about the controls. How do they work? Obviously we're going to have the controller and the mouse and keyboard versions, so how are they going to mesh together? Is there going to be a conflict there? Well, that's something that we can think about, and as we go along we can play test the different features and just see how that runs. We're obviously going to need to build a prefab for the player controller, because we are going to be using a singular character type, so it's we can build it to a prefab and have it all preset with all the preset values in it, so when you start the game that's how it is, and that'll be used in the whatever scenes we set up. We're going to need to worry about animations. Of course we're going to have so we can build on from there as well. We can actually define that a bit further. We're going to need attack animations, we're going to need movement. I'm actually going to sort of show you and give you a rundown on how this system works. This is just basically, you can use any kind of mind mapping system, or even any other method that you might want to use to just throw down ideas and link them together. But as long as you've got something sort of written down somewhere so that you can refer back to it and figure out how things are going to flow, it just lets you visualize a bit more about the game design and the game development that you're getting into. So we've got attack movement. We're obviously going to need animations for spell casting. We'll need animations for interacting, and then of course any kind of events that might happen. So you might actually have cinematic events. I am going to try and do something like that, maybe play with the camera a little bit, give it something a little bit different, and we'll figure out how that's going to work with the animations tied to the character. Also, so interacting, so like opening up doors, flicking switches, those sorts of interactions. And then, actually, what have we got here? Animations with events. That could also come down here under camera. Events, movement, attacking. So this is just looking at how the camera is going to control in these sorts of scenarios. So if there's a cinematic event going on, how are we going to handle the camera? If there's movement, what's the camera going to look like? Is it going to be off to to the right of the character? Is it going to be directly behind? Is it going to be a bit above or close up? Attacking as well, how are we going to handle the camera attacking, so that you've got the lock-on system where you can actually target the enemy and keep them in view that whole time. So they're just some of the things that we can go through with that. Alright, we'll move on from that. We'll look into the quests now. So I've got here quest givers. We need to think about how we're going to set up the NPCs to give quests, what that's going to look like in game, how that's going to read out. Quest lines, we need to take a think about, so things like theme, game mechanics, game flow. So obviously we need to think about stuff, so the theme, so the quest lines need to match the theme, which is like, the light-hearted adventure. So when we're writing the story side of the quests, we need to figure out how that's going to interact with the overall feeling of the game, or the thematic, or the atmosphere of the game. We need to also think about the game mechanics, so we need to understand how the game actually functions itself, so all the different combat mechanics, all the spells, all the inventory, the way the player controls in the environment, and we need to figure out how that works, how it interacts with objects in the environment as well, so that we're not designing a quest that just can't be done by the game mechanics, or just feels clunky with the game mechanics, which ties into this next one here as well, the game flow. So we don't want to have a bunch of fetch quests that are all doubling up on each other, so that your character will spend the player will spend an hour doing the same repetitive quest over and over, because they'll lose interest, and it won't be a fun game, and it will overall detract from the feeling that you get from the game. And then quest types, so we need here for sort of based on that one there, so avoid repetition, maintain focus, game flow, which is actually scope that one, game flow. So we're going to tie that one back into game flow again. So avoiding the repetition, like I said before, we don't really want to double up. I do want to try and do this to just sort of showcase variety, because again I'm trying to do this more to showcase what the quest system can do. So I want to trying to have one of every different quest type in the demo. I don't want to double up on a quest to make you do the same sort of thing twice just to show off the alternate feature of something. I'll try and put all the features in the one quest line to show you how that works. And again, maintaining focus and the game flow. So basically, what does my player have to do? Am I leading them on a quest that really has nothing to do with what I'm trying to achieve with this demo? Does it match the game flow? So does it slow the game down too much and people lose interest and they don't care? And then again, with the avoid repetition, showcasing the variety of that one. So just close that up. So let's have a look now at dialogue. So we've got to think about the NPC dialogues. How is that going to work? How's it going to tie in with the quests? How are we just going to have random NPCs that will talk to us in the game world? Do we have to go up and interact with them, that sort of thing? NPC stores, so the shopping tool, which is actually built into the RPG add-on, so there is a store system in there that works. How is that going to look? How is that going to be accessed via NPCs? Is it going to be an NPC like a character itself, or is it just going to be an environment object, that sort of thing? And then we need to look at game event UI. So this will be dialogue that pops up to explain or to narrate parts of the game. Now, dialogue for the demo, it's all going to be text-based. I'm not going to be integrating any kind of voice acting in the game, because I think that will be a whole extra layer that's really not sort of part of the features in the game that are there. We'd have to design our own system for that. I really want to utilise some of the sort of the hidden systems that are within the Invector controller. I mean, it's not really hidden, but you can display a UI with dialogue in it and controls to sort of skip through that will work quite easily. So we can certainly set up events where you'll run into an area and it will pause the game and pop up with a dialogue explaining a part of the story or explaining a dialogue when you talk to someone, that sort of thing. And you can click on OK there to continue and play on with the game. Alright, so let's jump through to the enemy AI now. So we're looking here, we're going to need to sort out the behaviours of the enemy AI. Using the new template, we can set up a whole lot of different behaviours. We can have, say, civilians, we can have animals, we can have guards that patrol an area, we can have friendly AI, we can have unfriendly AI, we can have companions. Not sure how I'm going to handle companions in this. I would like to have the companion feature. I haven't explored it fully yet with the behaviour template, but I know that companions were a part of the previous AI, and I'm pretty sure you can build them in this system. We obviously just have to look into that, and the way that's going to integrate again with our game mechanics, so the player controller, how that's going to control and how that's going to mesh with the rest of our game. We'll have to figure that out. Another one we're going to have to look at as well is the animations. So the animation control is pretty much the same as the player controller, but we can obviously limit it and then change it up a little bit so that it specifically meets the enemy itself. One of the cool things with a template is that while it is built off the humanoid model that comes with the Invector system, you can actually use a more generic model as long as you have the animations set up and they use the Unity Mechanism system. You can trigger that off quite easily, but it does take a little bit of setup. But we can go through that in one of the later episodes when we start trying to build up our enemy. Obviously we're going to need to make prefabs, so that way we can actually save the enemy out as prefabs and then use them in a spawn system to spawn in when we need them based off that prefab pool. And then we're going to need to figure out their stats as well, so whether we have some sort of scaling option for the AI so that it matches the player level as you go along, or whether we just have a base stat saved to the prefab and we just increase the level increment there, so we have areas that are higher level and the player needs to build up to get to that area, that sort of thing. Next one down, interactive world objects. This one's actually just quite a quick one. We're really talking about doors, switches and moving platforms. So we can create, out of these three things, we can create all sorts of puzzles and stuff like that. So switches that will move platforms or open doors, doors that will open and close by themselves or need to be interacted with to section off different areas. So maybe your character will move through an area, you want that door to close behind them to engage in like the next part of the story or the next part of the quest and block them from going anywhere else. As well as moving platforms, that's something that's been built into the controller for quite a while. You can use that so that they need to have a little bit of platform jumping and skill-based control to reach areas that you might have rewarded items, things like that in. So in here as well, so we'll move on to the inventory. So we need to talk about weapons and equipable items. At the moment, there's no real armor system for Unity, for the Invector controller. There have been a few different add-ons in the past that have worked on it, but at the moment there's nothing that really sort of ties in with what we want to do. So we're going to avoid having equipable armors, especially because the Cinti models themselves aren't really modifiable in that sense. So we're going to pretty much just have weapons and equipment, so weapons and shields and spell staves, things like that, which will tie into my spells system up here. The next way we're going to look at is aid items, so you want things like health potions, experience giving tomes, and things like ammunition for the spell system, which will be in the form of like mana crystals, so basically like ammunition for a shooting weapon or a ranged weapon. So arrows as well is another one like that. And then you'd have quest and functional objects. These are things that you need to collect in order that don't, you can't equip them. They don't give you any benefit other than they allow you to advance along a quest line or allow you to interact with world objects. So such as key cards for doors, say a key for a locked door or a key for a locked switch, or even just the big switch arm itself. Maybe you've got to plug it into the switch and then use that to open the door, that sort of thing. So we can add in that tie-in with the interactive world objects. So moving on from that, we've got the stats as well. So we need to figure out player stats such as the health, the damage, the experience. Stamina is built into the controller, and we can utilize that for a few different things. That can sort of we can limit the player in its ability to create attacks and to sort of slow the player down so that they're not just a massive killing machine that gets unstoppable. You can actually also turn it off if you play around with some of the settings and play around with the scripting as well. I like to keep it in there. I would like to tie it in one day to using it like as a form of mana so you can control the spells, but for this demonstration what I'm going to be doing is actually using the shooter mechanics to control the spells. So the spells themselves will be done, actually we'll move straight into that here, we'll go into spells. So I'm going to be utilising the shooter mechanic, which is basically the spells will be cast from an equipable item, which will be like a wand or a large staff, and that will be your spell casting tool, and that will allow you to shoot as though you were shooting a rifle or a handgun, but you're actually shooting a magic spell out at the time, and it will act, so we'll be using ammunition instead of the stamina meter to do that one. So that's where we've got with that. So let's move on now to world building. Now, again, I said I'll put this one aside because this one is something that I really like to sort of focus on after I've got all of the core stuff set up. That's when I get into world building, but that's the physical world building. So that's like modifying your terrain, setting up your this and that. You do a little bit of that during the actual setup phase for your mechanics, because you do need to test out some of the functionality that you've got in an actual environment that would be in your game, just to see that, make sure that the camera works, make sure that the player controller matches it, make sure that the enemy AI can actually function in an environment like that. But you don't go into the full scale beautification of the world or setting up everything until you get to that point. But what you can do beforehand, and what sort of helps tie in with your theme and your atmospheric and giving you an idea for what your game is going to look like, you need to think about things like the lore, you need to think about the story, but again, the environment and the demo arena can sort of come in a bit later on in the process. I like to focus more on the core at the start of it and the actual functionality of the system. But we're going to take a look at, just after this now, we're going to take a look at setting up the lore, just to give us a bit more of an idea about our theme and our setting from our game document. So again, like the atmospherics and the thematic setting, just so we get a bit more of an idea, like you're utilising this image for what we want to actually see in our product. And if you're building a game that's more than a demo, it's definitely worthwhile setting this stuff up beforehand. You don't even need to be a game designer to do it. You don't need to be on a computer. You can just write this stuff down, keep this stuff in your memory so you know what you're sort of working with. So one of the things that I used in the old series has actually had an upgrade, and it's pretty good. It's this Asga's fantasy map generator. So this here has had an update, and it's added in a lot more stuff that's actually really cool stuff. This can help you really kickstart, if you're trying to set up the lore, you're trying to set up the world that you're going to be working in. This is what you want to use to help that. So I'm just going to close it out here. So it's basically, to get to it, you can actually just Google fantasy map generator, and it's one of the first hits that you get, but otherwise it's asgar.github.io and fantasy map generator, so you'll be able to find it through that URL. So we're going to have a look at some of the functionality of it now. Up in the top corner, we can make a new map. So if I'm just going to create new map, click on that, and you'll see it should randomly generate a new town. And as you can see now, it's got up here, we've just got the basic thing. It all looks colourful, looks nice, and it's given us like land masses, names, all sorts of things that you can do. We can actually zoom in on it too and see some of the other functions. Now we've got cities, we've got roads and connections to smaller cities, we've got terrain, so we've got obviously mountains here, a little bit of that. We've also got all the water things. We've also got borders for empires and things like that, and cultural borders. Actually, I'll show you cultural borders. See, we can toggle in a whole lot of stuff here. So at the moment, we've got a political map, which is basically border of empires, names of things like that. You can select here. I want to show the height map. So now we've got like a little bit more. It's actually generated a height map based on where all the mountains are, where all the low regions are, things like that. So that's pretty cool. Not something we can directly use in Unity's functionality, but enough to sort of generate some really cool looking maps that can really inspire us to create. You can set up a grid as well if you wanted to do that. So now you can see that it's separated into these little cool little tile templates here. There's sort of, you can separate, you can use that if you are going to be making a tile-based game, but we're not going to, so I'll turn that off. The overlay of an actual tile map as well. So instead of having the grid split in that, we've actually just got a generic grid that goes over the top of it. We're going to turn that off. We can actually sort out cultures as well. So now you can see where the sort of borders of different empires, so you can have like racial traits that come along with empires or that move into other areas. Sometimes it might go across the borders of empires. Turn that off. Again, routes, rivers, countries, borders, the relief, labels, icons, all sorts of really cool stuff. You could change the style from that to... yeah, I don't really know what that does, but good. Oh, okay, sorry, this is changing the colours for different features and that you've got there. You can also turn it into a grayscale map. Looks pretty cool. You can turn it into a sepia tone, which looks even cool if you're going to do like the sort of hand-drawn style. Ooh. You can turn it into dingy, which sort of, dulls some of the colours, makes it look a little bit old. You can also tint it, which is just looks like it's the standard one. Going to leave it at that because I do like some of the colours and that in it. Here's where you can change a whole bunch of the different options to sort of get what you really want to get out of it. So we've got high island, we've got volcano, low island, continents. I want to change it to continents. I want to try that. I want to go to a new map. And obviously you've got ocean layers here, which is standard 3. So you basically got the littoral stuff, so your small ships will be able to go through here fine, then it gets gradually deeper till you've got deep ocean. And now of course we've got some kind of cool looking continents here. Comes with all these name generators, things like that, so you don't even really have to come up with your own races or things like that. You can use these names to inspire just in your mind what kind of people would live here, and then divide it up that way. It's half of the work is done for you, and I think it's a really awesome tool for it. Of course you can customize from that. Countries, so as you can see, it comes up here with an editor, so if you do have an idea for some of the names that you want to use, it's obviously got it here. You can change all the different little features. The height map, so you can actually adjust the height map as well, put in your own mountain ranges, things like that. Cultures. Again, so as you can see here, Anginia and Mamsilia are both the one culture, just spread across 2 different empires, and it looks like that also couples across to here too. And as you can see as well, with that, the culture, they actually keep the naming conventions across them. So you can see there's Aenias, Ilias, Inias, and non. I don't really guess that matches, but you can see what I'm getting at, how it sort of tries to keep the same kind of choices with the way that it delivers the names and that, to represent that it is actually the same culture. I think that's a really fantastic attention to detail that's been put into this, and that's why it's a really good find. You can also change the scale, things like that. So distant unit miles, I'm going to put it in kilometres because I'm not an imperialist, or no, it is an imperial. Imperial's the miles. Yeah, metric. I'm a metric person. Cool. Anyway, and you can change the population point. Okay, so you can change all sorts of functions. These are just some of the stuff. I haven't even really looked at some of the new stuff for this, but it's just so fantastically done. I think it's really, really clever. As you can see here, so 3,732 kilometres. So basically, we could set up an entire set of terrains on this in Unity, and actually map it out to that. To do that, you could, if you know what you're doing with Photoshop and the height map functions of whatever terrain editor you got, you can actually extract this into, save it out to a format that you could use. So you got map.svg.png. So if you've already got some formats there that you could probably use in another system to actually draw that data into a terrain editing system and get that direct terrain, and then you save this as an image, so this is your game map. Something that I'll definitely look at later on, but right now all I'm really doing, it's pretty cool, don't know why that's there, but let's I don't know how to get rid of those things, but oh, here we go, just close that off. Yeah, right now I'm just using this because I'm only making a demo. It's only going to be focused on one little spot, so I'm really just going to use it as a little bit of sort of, background to, to what I want to do in the demo, and I can sort of, plan my town around that when I'm thinking about the world building. So let's have a look at some of these. We've got Yonam. I don't even know how to pronounce half of these things, but it does sound pretty cool. So we just think of something that's quite, oh, this one here's a little port. That's awesome. Let's have a look. Where's somewhere that we would like to have as our little demo town? I want something that's sort of, locked off, maybe stuck between some mountains. So maybe this area here would actually be quite good, because it looks like it's very sort of plains and very hills. A little bit of mountains. Maybe there's more of a mountainous region. Where's a big mountain region? Boviumia. Oh, again, that's more plains. Where's our height map? Let's go layout. Height map. Oh, did I turn that off? So we don't have very high mountains in this area. It all seems to be, pretty much this is the most area that we've got. So you know what? Maybe we'll talk. We'll set the game in this here, Hapshian, and of course maybe you want to get from there. It's a little fishing village. So maybe we could set our game around a little fishing village, and the player starts there as a fisherman or something, and then obviously comes a cropper of some sort of evil deed and has to escape the town, whatever, get out to the nearest town, which is Dango or Hando. So maybe that can be the little Kickstarter for our little theme event there. So what I can do is I can save that as an image, or I can basically just sort of keep this. I think you can actually save this out to something so that you can load it up again later on, and use that to base our thing on. Actually, I am gonna save that as something. I'll do that after I finish the video so that I can refer to it later on. But again, this is just a way to sort of kickstart those ideas in your head, and get that sort of world building thing happening for the lore and the story in the background, which you can really start at any time that you're not sitting at your computer. Doesn't necessarily tie into a lot of this. A lot of the core features and the functionality you need to do is purely sort of code based and around the playability, but when you get to things like spells and weapons and stuff like that, it's like what is actually going to exist in the world that you're creating. Now, because again I'm going to be doing it as a demo, one of the things I wanted to do was actually limit what was going on in the demo. So in your game, you might want to have hundreds of different weapons or different equipment and stuff like that. Obviously, I want to try and limit that, so I'm only really making a quick series. So I'm not here for years trying to fill out the spreadsheets and all the different stuff for the different weapons. So on this one here, I'm actually going to say I'm going to limit it to. I want to try and have each type of weapon so that I can change up some of the animations and show you how to change those animations as well as the attack profiles of them. So we want say 3 types of each weapon. So I'm going to have 3 one-handed swords, 3 one-hand axes, 3 staves, and 3 two-handed swords. So what I'm sort of saying there is the reason I got 3 of them is because we're going to actually have a scale system. So you've got your basically your rusty sword, you've got your slightly improved sword, and then you have your top of the line sword. So each of those, so you basically, each weapon goes up in a value increment based on what it's made out of. So you've got in Minecraft you'll have your diamond, it's your top tier, and then you'll have cobalt or whatever, all sorts of things like that. So that's sort of what I'm getting at by having 3 of each. So they'll really effectively be the one type of weapon and utilising the one animation set from the player controller, but they will have 3 level increments so that you can have progression in gaining new items and equipment like that. Then we also want to have a look at say 1 rifle, because we are using the shooter element, and I do have some fantasy style rifles, and we can really use that to add the ranged element into the game for the character, and add some sort of cool effects with that. And we'll have 1 type of bow. I'm not going to make 3, even though I could have tiered bows. It's just easy just to show. I really wanted to sort of show you how the bow system works in it and how to get a bow up and running over the top of the default bow that they've got built in the game, because it is a little bit fiddly. I have had troubles with it in the past trying to get it to sit right, but hopefully I can take an episode to show you how to do that. And outside of that, we want to have maybe 2 shields. So we want a small and a large shield, and it offers you different defense values when you put those on. As for, again, limitations, we'll talk about the enemy AI, what types, so the prefabs. So we're going to have, say, one companion. Oh, it's not really an enemy AI. Yep, one companion. Like I was saying before, I really want to add in the companion feature, and we should be able to do it with a template. So we'll add in one companion, say 3 goblins, which includes melee, ranged, and spellcaster. Now the reason I'm actually separating these out is because later on I can do a little thing where I can flag them as, incomplete or completed, that sort of thing. So as we can go along, we can actually track the progress in the demo, and that way I can keep track of where I'm up to when I'm talking with you guys. So that's a really sort of handy feature of this mind mapping as well. And we want 3 different undead types. Again, we want the melee, ranged, and spellcaster, so we can have, an undead skeleton, an undead zombie, an undead skeleton with a bow, and maybe a ghost that sort of shoots magic at you. And then we want 3 bandits, so 3 humanoid ones. Again, melee, whoops, wrong in there, ranged, and spellcaster. And then we want to have one big boss to end our game on. So basically at the end of the quest line, you'll get to the big boss character, and it will have basically all 3 attack types on them. And we'll figure out how that works, and of course we'll tie those stats into each one of those characters on the prefab. We're going to come back here to lore building as well. So for the demo arena, we want to sort of limit the scope, so we're only really going to have 1 dungeon. It's because I want to be able to sort of set up a dungeon run for you, and show you how you could set that sort of thing up. 1 town that you can sort of start in, and you can go back there to check out the stores or check out the NPCs. Maybe when you progress through the unlock a new section of the town or a new NPC that you can talk to. And then we want to have 2 mob areas. So you basically have 1 dungeon where you run through the quests in general, 2 mob areas where there might be 1 or 2 quests, but it's also just sort of a leveling up field so you can get used to how the game runs. And how the combat mechanics work before you enter the main dungeon, which will be the main quest, and maybe the boss is at the end of the dungeon. And that way we can have 2 different areas too, so we can have goblins in one area, bandits in the other, and then the undead in the dungeon, or whatever you want to do with something like that. But that way we limit the scope of our game, so we're not just making a big open world sandbox where we really are just sort of limiting the player along a line, which is actually another thing to think about. So this is more aesthetics and environment as well, game flow. So do we want a literal point A to point B where the character goes from one area and is basically led along a single path that goes through a couple of areas? They can explore each area as they go along, and it culminates in the dungeon at the end. Once they get to the end of that, that's the end of the game. Or do we want to have just a massive sort of free roam area where they can go back and forth between the different sections in order to complete the quests? I want to go with that. Excuse me. More of that style. I'll keep the linear part for the dungeon because that's sort of what sets the dungeon apart from the rest of the world. Just so I can sort of show you some of the mechanics for the quest, because some of the quest mechanics is you do need to go back to the quest giver NPC, which will be back in the town. So I don't really want the character to walk back through the level that he's gone through. I'm not setting it up as like a linear level game. I think I'll keep it a little bit more free range, but still tie it into that thing where you don't want to progress into an area that your character's not really ready for. So you're not compelled to go out and search and explore. So we'll try that. One of the other things as well, actually, I think with the enemy AI, I might actually just put in a generic animal character. So it's not really an attacking one, it's just a benign one. Oh, actually, we're going to need as well civilian NPCs. Oops. NPCs. So that's one of the couple of things that I didn't really think of until just then, is that I am going to need to, I'll have the civilians walking around in the town that are harmless to you, but they might run away if they see a monster, or there might be guards in there. So we'll just put in friendly guards. And just keep it, sort of limited to that. But I'll show you how to do that. We're obviously going to do a massive. Well, there might be a couple of episodes that cover the enemy AI setting up the different versions. pretty much each one of them, each of these monsters will use the particular FSM for the enemy AI. So the melee goblin will be the same as the undead and the same as the bandits, because they're going to use the same thing. Same as the range will be the same all through all three of them, and the spellcast will be the same. The only thing that really changes is their visual style and the statistics that they've got against their name. And then, of course, the boss will be a mix of all three, so he'll have his own control behaviours. And then the animals will just, again, they'll be like generic wandering ones that will wander around. You might be able to kill them to get a couple of resources, or, you know, maybe there's a quest to go out and get 10 pelts, because that's, you know, what RPGs seem to like to do these days. And then the civilian NPCs, you can interact with them, or you can talk to them. They might stop and talk to you, but they'll generally just wander around the town just for, you know, the environment's aesthetic. And then friendly guards will be able to protect you if any of these guys start coming into the town to, like, you're running away from them. Anyway, so that is the first sort of step here. I'm not actually going to open up Unity for this episode. I'm sorry if you think that's what was going to happen. We're going to jump straight into it. I'm going to save that for next episode, because I'm getting everything set up. I'm also not going to cover importing the different assets. I don't believe I'll need to. You should be able to import everything one by one. I definitely say start with the Invector third-person shooter asset, or the I can't suggest using the melee, because everything I'm going to be doing is going to be based on the shooter. So if you are only using melee, just be aware that there's some of the functionality might not be there as we go through, and you'll need to be, you'll need to recognise which parts aren't going to work because it's a shooter functionality. Anyway, installing the Invector controller, then putting the beta AI on top of that, and then doing the RPG on top of that. That should set you up with all of those things. Anyway, thank you for watching this. I know it was a bit long-winded, but hopefully it gives you an idea of how we're going to go with the rest of the series, and what we're going to look at and get you prepared for what you need to have in order to continue on. Again, thanks very much for watching. I'll catch you in the next episode.